Ambassador Velthar stood at the viewing port of his ship, watching the blue and green planet called Earth grow larger. His crystalline body caught the light from the distant star, creating small rainbows on the metal walls around him. He had been sent by the Galactic Federation to study these new creatures called humans. His job was simple: decide if they were strong enough to join the Federation. The ambassador had met many species in his long life. The Krathari were fierce warriors with thick shells that could stop laser fire. The Nixari were brilliant scientists who lived for thousands of years. The Garathi felt no pain and could fight with broken bones. Each species brought something valuable to the Federation. But what could humans offer? His first look at their space station surprised him. It was smaller than he expected, and it looked fragile. The metal seemed thin, and the windows looked like they might break easily. When his ship docked, he heard strange sounds through the walls, clicking and humming noises that seemed constant. Captain Daeho Kim met him at the airlock. The human was shorter than Velthar expected, with soft-looking skin and small bones that showed through his thin arms. The captain wore what looked like protective clothing even inside his own station. This puzzled the ambassador. Why did humans need protection in their own safe spaces? "Welcome to Orbital Station Unity," Captain Kim said with a smile. His voice was higher than the deep rumbles Velthar was used to hearing from strong species. "We're honored to host the Federation's first visit to our system." Velthar studied the human carefully. The captain's skin looked so thin that blue lines showed underneath it. His eyes were wet and seemed fragile, not covered by the thick protective layers that most intelligent species had. When Captain Kim moved, he did so carefully, as if afraid of hitting something too hard. "I am here to observe your species," Velthar said in his formal way. "The Federation must understand your capabilities before considering membership." Dr. Sunmi Park joined them next. She was even smaller than the captain, with delicate hands that shook slightly when she moved them. She carried a device that beeped softly every few seconds. When Velthar asked about it, she explained it measured the air around them. "Humans need very specific air to breathe," Dr. Park said. "Too much or too little of certain gases can hurt us quickly. We have to watch it all the time." This worried Velthar. Most Federation species could breathe many different types of air, or hold their breath for hours if needed. Humans seemed to need constant care just to stay alive. The medical briefing that Dr. Park gave him was even more concerning. She showed him images of human bones which looked hollow and weak compared to the solid bone structures of other species. She explained how human skin could tear from small cuts, how their organs could be damaged by impacts that wouldn't even bruise a Krathari. "A fall from just twice our height can kill a human," Dr. Park said, pointing to charts on her screen. "Our bones break under pressure that most species wouldn't even feel. We can die from losing just a small amount of blood." Velthar made notes on his datapad. These humans seemed incredibly fragile. How had they survived long enough to develop space travel? Most dangerous planets would have killed off such weak creatures long ago. The tour of the station continued, and Velthar saw more evidence of human weakness. The corridors had soft padding on the walls and corners. The floors had a strange bouncy feeling that Dr. Park explained was meant to prevent injuries from falls. Every room had emergency medical supplies nearby. "Why do you need so much medical equipment?" Velthar asked. "Humans get hurt easily," Captain Kim explained. "Even during normal work, someone might cut themselves or bump into something hard enough to cause damage. We always have to be ready to help." As if to prove his point, an alarm sounded from somewhere deeper in the station. Captain Kim and Dr. Park both moved quickly but carefully toward the sound. Velthar followed, curious to see what kind of emergency required such urgency. They found a group of humans gathered around someone sitting on the floor. It was Engineer Boram Choi holding her hand against her chest. Red liquid, blood, was seeping between her fingers. Her face was pale and she looked weak. "What happened?" Dr. Park asked, kneeling beside the injured human. "I was fixing the power relay," Boram said in a shaky voice. "The metal panel had a sharp edge. When I moved my hand, it cut me." Velthar looked at the metal panel. The edge was barely sharp at all, certainly not enough to cut through the thick hide of any species he knew. But somehow this tiny edge had injured the human badly enough to make her bleed and shake. Dr. Park worked quickly, cleaning the wound and wrapping it in white material. Other humans brought medical devices and containers of liquid. They all seemed very worried about what looked like a minor scratch to Velthar. "Will she be okay?" asked Hyunwoo Lee. the human who served as diplomatic attaché. His voice sounded scared. "Yes, but she'll need to rest for several days," Dr. Park said. "The cut is deep enough that she could get an infection if we're not careful. And she's lost enough blood that heavy work might make her pass out." Engineer Choi was helped to the medical bay, walking slowly and supported by 2 other humans. The remaining crew spent the next hour cleaning every drop of blood from the area and checking the metal panel for other sharp edges. Velthar watched all of this with growing amazement. One small cut had disabled a human for days and required the attention of multiple crew members. In his experience, most species would barely notice such a minor injury. That evening, Velthar had dinner with Captain Kim and his senior officers. The food was strange, much softer than what most species ate, and the humans chewed it carefully before swallowing. They drank liquids constantly throughout the meal, and Captain Kim explained that humans could die in just a few days without water. "Your species seems very—" Velthar paused, trying to find a polite word. "Very delicate." The humans looked at each other. Some smiled while others seemed sad. "We know we're not the strongest species," Captain Kim said, "or the fastest or the smartest. We break easily, we die young, and we need a lot of care just to survive." "Then how did you develop space travel?" Velthar asked. "Most species that reach the stars are much more durable." "We work together," said Dr. Park. "When one of us is hurt or weak, the others help. We build tools and machines to make up for what our bodies can't do, and we're very careful about safety." "But doesn't your fragility make you afraid?" Velthar asked. "How can you explore dangerous places when you're so easy to damage?" The humans were quiet for a moment. Then Hyun-Woo Lee spoke up. "Being fragile doesn't make us afraid," he said. "It makes us careful. We know that every choice we make could be our last one. So we try to make good choices. We know we might die tomorrow, so we try to make today count." Velthar didn't understand this way of thinking. In his experience, species that could be easily killed were naturally cautious and avoided risks. But these humans had built spaceships and traveled between stars despite knowing how dangerous it was for them. Over the next few days, Velthar continued to observe the humans. He watched them work, eat, sleep, and interact with each other. Everything they did seemed to involve extra care and planning. They moved slowly in dangerous areas, wore protective equipment for simple tasks, and constantly checked on each other's health and safety. But he also noticed something else. Despite their physical weakness, the humans were incredibly persistent. When Engineer Choi returned to work with her hand still bandaged, she immediately began fixing the same power relay that had injured her. When asked why she didn't wait longer to heal, she said the station needed the repairs. "The job needs to be done," she said simply. "My hand will heal, but the station needs power now." Velthar saw this attitude in all the humans. They would push themselves to work even when tired, hurt, or sick. They took risks when necessary, despite knowing how dangerous it was for them. They seemed to understand their own weakness but refused to let it stop them from doing what they thought was important. The ambassador began to write his first report to the Federation Council. He described the humans' physical frailty in detail, listing all the ways they were weaker than other known species. He explained how easily they were injured, how much care they needed, and how many resources they spent just staying alive. But as he wrote, he found himself thinking about the conversation at dinner. The humans knew they were weak, but they didn't seem to think it was a disadvantage. They acted as if their fragility was just another problem to solve, like bad weather or difficult terrain. In his report, Velthar wrote, "Humans appear to be the most physically vulnerable sentient species encountered to date. Their bodies are easily damaged, they require constant environmental support, and they have shorter lifespans than most Federation members. However, they have developed advanced technology and social structures that compensate for these weaknesses." He paused before writing his recommendation. The logical choice was to suggest that humans were too weak for Federation membership. But something about their attitude bothered him. Most weak species were either extinct or lived in hiding. Humans had not only survived, but had built a spacefaring civilization. Recommendation: extended observation period before considering Federation membership, he finally wrote. While humans show tech, 3 weeks after his arrival, Velthar was still puzzled by the humans. He had watched them work, eat, and live their careful lives on the space station. Everything they did showed how weak they were. They wore protective gear for simple tasks, moved slowly around sharp corners, and spent hours each day checking their air and water supplies. The ambassador was writing another report when alarms started blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors and humans began running, though even their running looked careful and controlled. Velthar found Captain Kim in the command center staring at screens filled with red dots. "What is happening?" Velthar asked. "Hegemony pirates," Captain Kim said, his voice tight with tension. "They're attacking New Busan colony. 15 ships including 2 heavy cruisers." Velthar knew about hegemony pirates. They were brutal fighters who attacked weak targets for profit. Their ships had thick armor and powerful weapons. Most species called for Federation help when pirates appeared, because fighting them was usually suicide. "Have you contacted the Federation fleet?" Velthar asked. Captain Kim looked at him strangely. "The nearest Federation ships are 6 days away. New Busan has 2 million people. They'll all be dead or enslaved by then." "Then surely you will negotiate," Velthar said. "Pirates usually accept payment to leave civilians alone." But Captain Kim was already giving orders to his crew. "All ships prepare for immediate departure. Set course for New Busan, maximum speed. Combat stations, all crews." Velthar watched in shock as the humans prepared for battle. This made no sense. The human fleet had only 8 ships and they were smaller than the pirate vessels. According to his data, human weapons were less powerful than hegemony guns and human ships had thinner armor. "Captain," Velthar said carefully, "your fleet is outnumbered and outgunned. Logic suggests that fighting will only result in the destruction of your ships along with the colony." Captain Kim turned to face him. The human's face was pale, but his eyes were hard. "Ambassador, those are our people down there. Our families, our friends, our children. We don't abandon them just because the odds are bad. But you will all die," Velthar pointed out. "What purpose does that serve?" "Maybe we'll die," Captain Kim said. "But maybe we won't. And maybe we'll hurt them badly enough that they think twice before attacking another human colony." The human fleet departed within 2 hours. Velthar traveled aboard Captain Kim's ship, amazed by what he saw. The humans were clearly afraid. He could see it in their faces and hear it in their voices. But they prepared for battle anyway. Commander Gi Tai-yoon, the security chief, gave briefings to the crew about hegemony tactics. The pirates liked to capture ships intact, so they would try to disable engines and weapons rather than destroy everything immediately. This might give the humans chances to fight back. "Remember," Commander Yoon told his troops, "we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to save those people. Do whatever it takes." Lieutenant Yoon Ji-song, one of the fighter pilots, spoke with her squadron before launch. She was small even by human standards, with thin arms that looked like they would break if she hit something too hard. But her voice was steady as she explained their mission. "The pirates have better ships and more experience," she said. "But they're used to fighting enemies who give up when things get tough. We're not going to give up." During the 3-day journey to New Busan, Velthar observed the human crew. They maintained their usual careful habits, checking their equipment, monitoring their health, wearing protection during dangerous tasks. But they also did things he hadn't seen before. Many humans wrote messages on small devices, then sealed them in metal containers. When Velthar asked about this, Dr. Park explained that these were letters to their families, in case they didn't survive the battle. "Don't humans usually write such messages before every dangerous mission?" Velthar asked. "We don't usually go on missions this dangerous," Dr. Park said quietly. "Most of the time we can avoid fighting. But not today." The ambassador realized that the humans knew they were probably going to die. They had calculated the odds just as well as he had. But instead of turning back, they spent their time writing goodbye letters and checking their weapons. When they arrived at New Busan, the situation was as bad as expected. The pirate fleet had surrounded the colony and was already landing troops on the planet's surface. The colony's small defense ships had been destroyed or damaged. Distress signals filled the radio channels. Captain Kim's fleet moved into attack formation without hesitation. The human ships spread out and approached from different angles, trying to avoid giving the pirates easy targets. The battle started badly for the humans. The pirate ships had stronger shields and heavier guns. Within minutes, one human destroyer was badly damaged and falling behind. But instead of retreating, the other human ships moved to protect it. Velthar watched the tactical display in amazement. Every military theory he knew said that the humans should have retreated immediately. Their ships were taking damage faster than they could repair it, and they weren't hurting the pirates very much. But the humans kept fighting. When Captain Damon Cho's cruiser lost its main guns, he used his ship to ram a pirate vessel. When Lieutenant Young-Jun Park's fighter squadron ran out of missiles, they flew directly at the enemy ships and used their laser cannons at close range. The turning point came when Lieutenant Song's fighter was hit by pirate fire. Velthar saw her ship spinning out of control, with atmosphere leaking from holes in the hull. Standard procedure would be to eject and hope for rescue. Instead, Song straightened her damaged fighter and flew directly toward the largest pirate ship. Her voice came over the radio, calm despite the chaos around her. "This is Eagle 7. My ship is too damaged to make it home anyway. I'm going to make it count." Velthar watched in horror as Song's fighter slammed into the pirate cruiser's engine section. The explosion destroyed both ships instantly. The pirates suddenly seemed confused. In Velthar's experience, most species became more cautious when they started taking heavy losses. They would try to minimize damage and preserve their forces, but the humans seemed to be doing the opposite. They were taking bigger risks as the battle went on. When the second human destroyer was critically damaged, Captain Minseok Jang didn't retreat. Instead, he ordered his crew to abandon ship, then flew it directly into the middle of the pirate formation before it exploded. The pirates, who had expected an easy victory, found themselves fighting an enemy that wouldn't give up even when dying. Human ships that should have surrendered kept fighting until they were completely destroyed. Human pilots who should have ejected to safety instead used their damaged fighters as weapons. After 6 hours of battle, something unexpected happened. The pirate fleet began to retreat. Velthar couldn't believe what he was seeing. The pirates still outnumbered the humans and had stronger ships. They could have won if they had kept fighting. But they were leaving. Captain Kim's voice came over the communication system speaking to the pirate leader. "This is Captain Kim of the Human Defense Fleet. You are ordered to leave this system immediately and never return." The pirate captain's response was angry, but also confused. "You cost us 3 ships, human." "3 ships for what? You can't even hurt our main fleet." "We hurt you enough," Captain Kim replied. "And if you stay, we'll hurt you more. Every human ship you destroy will take one of yours with it. How many can you afford to lose?" The pirates left without taking any prisoners or cargo from the colony. Their retreat didn't make sense to Velthar. They could have completed their mission and probably destroyed the remaining human ships. Later, as the human fleet limped back to base, Velthar asked Captain Kim about the pirates' behavior. "Why did they retreat?" "They were still stronger than your fleet." Captain Kim was quiet for a long moment. His ship was damaged, his crew was exhausted, and many of his friends were dead. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired but firm. "Pirates are bullies, Ambassador. They attack people who can't fight back. They're used to enemies who surrender when things get difficult." "But you were losing the battle," Velthar pointed out. "Yes, we were losing. But we weren't surrendering. Every ship they destroyed cost them time, ammunition, and sometimes one of their own ships. Pirates don't like expensive victories." Velthar thought about this as he watched the human crew work to repair their damaged ship. They moved carefully around the broken equipment, just as fragile as they had been before the battle. Engineer Boram Choi, her hand still scarred from her earlier injury, worked for hours to fix the life support systems. But something had changed in how Velthar saw them. These same fragile beings who could be hurt by sharp metal edges had just fought a battle that experienced pirates couldn't finish. He began to understand that human fragility might not be simple weakness. Lieutenant Song had died in the battle, but her death had destroyed one of the pirates' most powerful ships. Captain Yang had sacrificed his ship, but his sacrifice had broken the enemy formation. Most species fought to survive, but humans seemed to fight for something else, to protect others, to make their deaths meaningful, to hurt their enemies even while dying. This was a kind of strength that Velthar had never seen before. In his report to the Federation Council, he wrote, "Human fleet." 2 months after the pirate battle, Velthar was beginning to think he understood humans better. They were still fragile. He had seen Engineer Choi hurt herself again just last week, this time by lifting a box that was too heavy. But he had also seen how they refused to give up when fighting for something important. Then the hegemony escalated the conflict. The news came through emergency channels. Hegemony military forces had attacked and occupied Kepler Station. a human mining facility in the outer system. Unlike the pirates who wanted quick raids, this was a full military operation. The hegemony was testing human resolve. Velthar accompanied a Federation monitoring team to observe the situation. The Federation Council wanted to see how humans would respond to a professional military occupation. Would they negotiate? Would they call for help? Or would they do something else? Kepler Station was important to the humans because it mined rare metals needed for their spaceships. But it was also isolated and difficult to defend. The hegemony had landed 300 heavy infantry troops equipped with the best armor and weapons their military could provide. Against this force, the humans had sent Major Jinnah Kang with 47 Marines. Velthar studied the tactical situation from the Federation observation ship. The numbers were even worse than the pirate battle. The hegemony soldiers were trained professionals, not criminals looking for easy profit. Their equipment was military grade, designed to fight Federation forces. Their commander, General Thakmor, was known for efficient, brutal operations. "This is suicide," said Commander Zephi, the Federation team leader. 47 humans cannot defeat 300 hegemony troops. The logical response would be immediate negotiation. Velthar wasn't so sure anymore. He had learned not to predict human behavior based on logic alone. Major Kang's force approached Kepler Station in small transport ships that looked fragile compared to the hegemony assault craft. Her Marines were equipped with standard human gear, lighter armor and weaker weapons than their enemies carried. Many of them looked very young to Velthar's eyes. The hegemony commander sent a message to Major Kang's ship. "Human forces, you are outnumbered 6-1. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to military conventions. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force." Major Kang's response was short. "This is human territory. You are ordered to leave immediately. Your response is noted," General Thakmor replied. "You have 1 hour to reconsider." But the humans didn't use that hour to reconsider. Instead, they used it to study the station's layout and plan their attack. Velthar watched through Federation sensors as the Marines split into small groups and approached the station from different directions. The attack began at exactly 1 hour after the ultimatum. But it didn't follow any military tactics that Velthar recognized. Instead of trying to match the hegemony's superior firepower, the humans did something unexpected. They used the station's own structure against the invaders. Corporal Wu Jinhan led a team through the mining tunnels beneath the station. These tunnels were too small for the heavily armored hegemony troops, but just large enough for humans. The enemy had ignored them because they assumed no serious military force would fit through such narrow spaces. Private Min Su-jon, who looked barely old enough to be a soldier, crawled through air ventilation shafts to reach the station's power systems. The ducts were so small that even his thin human frame barely fit, but he managed to disable the lights in entire sections of the station, forcing the hegemony troops to fight in darkness. Sergeant Hana Yu used mining equipment as weapons. The station's rock crushers and metal cutters weren't designed for combat, but she turned them into deadly traps. When hegemony soldiers tried to secure the mining areas, they found themselves facing industrial machinery that could cut through their armor. Velthar realized that the humans were turning their physical weakness into an advantage. Because they were smaller and more fragile than their enemies, they could go places and do things that the heavily armored hegemony troops couldn't. But the most shocking thing was how the humans fought when they were injured. After 6 hours of fighting, Corporal Han was caught in an explosion that would have killed most species instantly. Velthar watched through station security cameras as the human crawled out of the rubble with obvious injuries. Broken bones, burned skin, bleeding from multiple wounds. Any reasonable being would have sought medical treatment immediately. Instead, Han continued fighting for 6 more hours. He moved slowly and carefully, but he kept fighting. When his rifle was damaged, he used mining tools. When those broke, he used rocks and metal bars. Velthar couldn't understand how Han was still alive, much less still fighting. The injuries would have incapacitated a Krathari warrior, or sent a Nexari scientist into emergency hibernation, but the human just kept going. Private Jian's behavior was even more puzzling. When his squad was eliminated by a hegemony assault team, the logical response would have been retreat. But Jian held a corridor alone against 12 enemy soldiers for 3 hours. The Federation monitors watched in amazement as the young human used every trick he could think of. He rigged doors to explode when opened. He dropped heavy equipment from the ceiling onto enemy soldiers. He even used the station's waste disposal system to flood corridors with toxic mining chemicals. The hegemony troops had better weapons and armor, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules of warfare. Every room could be a trap. Every corridor might hide a human with improvised weapons. The humans didn't fight like a military force. They fought like the station itself had come alive and was trying to kill the invaders. General Thakmore sent increasingly frustrated messages to his troops. How are 47 humans holding an entire station? Use overwhelming force. But overwhelming force was difficult to use when the enemy wouldn't stand still and fight properly. The humans appeared, attacked, then disappeared into parts of the station that the hegemony troops couldn't reach. They sabotaged equipment, set traps, and generally made life miserable for the occupation force. Major Kang herself was shot twice during the first day of fighting. Velthar saw her receiving medical treatment from Dr. Yong-Ho Lim, the Marines' medic. The wounds would have put most soldiers out of action for weeks, but 3 hours later Major Kang was back in command, planning the next phase of the battle. She moved stiffly and winced with pain, but she continued to coordinate her troops. How is she still functioning? Velthar asked Dr. Lim during a brief communication. Pain medication and willpower, the doctor replied while working on another wounded Marine. She knows her people need her leadership. The physical damage isn't immediately life-threatening, so she's choosing to fight through it. This concept of fighting through serious injuries was alien to Velthar. Most species naturally sought safety and healing when damaged. But humans seem to have an override system that let them ignore their body's need for rest and medical care. The battle continued for 3 days. The hegemony forces controlled most of the station, but they couldn't use it. Every time they tried to operate the mining equipment, humans would sabotage it. Every time they tried to establish secure communication, the humans would interfere with their signals. Worst of all, the casualties were mounting on both sides. The humans were taking terrible losses. Only 12 of the original 47 Marines were still combat effective. But they had killed or wounded over 200 hegemony troops. Velthar watched General Thakmore's final assault on the human positions. The hegemony commander committed all his remaining forces to one massive attack, determined to finish the humans once and for all. The humans fell back to the station's central command area. Major Kang, barely able to stand due to her injuries, prepared her last 12 Marines for a final defense. They had almost no ammunition left, their equipment was damaged, and several of them were wounded too badly to fight effectively. But when the hegemony troops broke through the final barriers, they found something they didn't expect. The humans had rigged the entire command center to explode. Major Kang's voice came over the station's communication system. General Thakmore, this is Major Kang. You have 10 minutes to evacuate your forces from Kepler Station. After that, we will detonate the nuclear charges we've placed throughout the facility. You're bluffing, the general replied. You would die too. Yes, we would, Major Kang said calmly. All 12 of us. But we'd take most of your forces with us and you'd never get the mining operation running again. There was a long silence. Then General Thakmore asked, what do you want? Complete withdrawal of hegemony forces from this system, permanent guarantee that you won't attack human civilians, and an apology to the families of the miners you killed when you attacked this station. Velthar couldn't believe what he was hearing. 12 wounded humans were negotiating terms with a superior military force, and somehow they held the winning position. General Thakmore agreed to the terms. As the hegemony forces evacuated Kepler Station, Velthar realized something important about human warfare. They didn't fight to win in the traditional sense. They fought to make victory too expensive for their enemies. The humans had been willing to die to defend the station. More than that, they had been willing to destroy the station rather than let the enemy have it. This made them almost impossible. 6 months after Kepler Station, Velthar thought he was beginning to understand human nature. They were fragile but fierce, weak but unwilling to surrender. Then the hegemony deployed a biological weapon, and Velthar learned something new about humans. Their capacity for sacrifice knew no limits. The target was Prometheus 7, a neutral research station where scientists from 23 different species worked together on peaceful projects. The station existed outside normal political boundaries. protected by ancient treaties that even the hegemony usually respected. But the war was escalating, and the hegemony wanted to send a message. The weapon they used was called Grey Death. It was designed to target oxygen-breathing species by breaking down cellular structures from the inside. Once exposed, victims had only hours before organ failure began. There was no cure, no treatment, and no protection except complete environmental suits. When the weapon was deployed, every species began immediate evacuation. The logical response was obvious: get away from the contaminated station as quickly as possible. The 847 researchers trapped inside were already as good as dead. Belthar was aboard a Federation evacuation ship when the human response arrived. He watched through the ship's sensors as a small human vessel approached Prometheus 7. The ship was barely larger than a shuttle, equipped with basic life support and minimal weapons. "Are those humans insane?" asked Commander Velkara, the ship's captain. "That station is a death trap. No one can survive Grey Death exposure." But the humans were already docking with the contaminated station. Dr. Young Ho No led the rescue team. He was a xenobiologist who had studied alien diseases for most of his career. Before entering the station, he gave a detailed briefing about what Grey Death would do to their bodies. "The weapon targets cellular repair mechanisms in oxygen-breathing species," he explained to his team. "Humans are actually more vulnerable than most species because our cells divide more rapidly. We'll have maybe 4 hours of useful function after exposure, then 6 to 8 hours of declining capability before complete organ failure." Engineer Sohrab Bayek, who had volunteered for the mission, asked the obvious question: "Is there any chance of survival if we go in there?" "No," Dr. No said simply. "Anyone who enters that station will die. The only question is how much we can accomplish before that happens." Belthar listened to this conversation with growing amazement. The humans were calmly discussing their own certain deaths as if it were just another mission parameter to consider. Pilot Seong Hwan, the team leader, studied the station's layout on his datapad. 847 people from 23 different species. The hegemony weapon was deployed 6 hours ago, so some of them are already dying. We need to get them out fast. "The math doesn't work," Engineer Beck pointed out. "Our ship can only carry maybe 50 people at a time. We'd need multiple trips, but we won't survive long enough for that." "Then we'll have to get creative," Pilot O said. The human team entered Prometheus 7 wearing full environmental suits. Velthar watched through the station's security cameras as they worked their way through contaminated corridors toward the emergency shelters where researchers were trapped. The station was a nightmare. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows through the toxic atmosphere. Bodies of maintenance workers who had been caught in the initial attack lay motionless in the hallways. The air itself looked wrong, thick and gray with the biological weapon, but the humans moved through it all with calm efficiency. Dr. No's first priority was the medical bay, where injured researchers were being treated by the station's automated systems. Many of the victims were from species that were even more vulnerable to Grey Death than humans. Some were already unconscious from the weapon's effects. The doctor worked for 2 hours, stabilizing patients and preparing them for evacuation. His environmental suit's readings showed increasing contamination levels, meaning the weapon was slowly eating through his protective equipment. Engineer Bayek had an even more dangerous job. She needed to restore power to the station's emergency transporters, the only way to evacuate large numbers of people quickly. The power systems were located in the most contaminated part of the station, where the hegemony had deliberately concentrated their weapon. Velthar watched her work through the security feed. She moved carefully but steadily, rerouting power cables and replacing damaged components. Her suit's integrity alarms were constantly beeping, warning that the Grey Death was beginning to penetrate her protection. After 3 hours, she succeeded in restoring partial power, but by then, her hands were visibly shaking through her suit's gloves. The biological weapon was starting to affect her nervous system. Pilot O coordinated the evacuation from the station's command center. He had to manually override dozens of safety systems that were designed to prevent people from leaving during a contamination event. Each override required precise timing and steady hands. But as the hours passed, the Grey Death was affecting all the humans. Dr. No's suit finally failed after 4 hours of exposure. He continued working for another hour before collapsing over a patient he was trying to treat. Engineer Bayek's hands began bleeding as the weapon broke down her cellular structure. She wrapped them in emergency bandages and kept working on the power systems. When her vision started to blur, she used voice commands to guide repair robots. Pilot O stayed at his post even after his suit's air supply became contaminated. He knew that leaving the command center would doom everyone still trapped in the station. So he removed his helmet and breathed the poisoned air directly, accepting death to keep the evacuation running. The most shocking moment came when the evacuation ships arrived. Other species rescue vessels approached cautiously, their crews wearing full protection and keeping minimal contact with the contaminated station. But when the first group of survivors reached the docking bay, Velthar saw something that defied all logic. The survivors weren't all the same species. Mixed in with the healthy aliens were humans who had clearly been on the station when the attack began. Dr. Minjai Seo, a human researcher, was carrying a Nexari scientist who was too weak to walk. Captain Donghai Park, a human security officer, was guiding a group of Krathari refugees despite obvious signs of gray death poisoning. These humans had been trapped in the station just like everyone else. They should have been among the first to die from the biological weapon. But instead of seeking evacuation for themselves, they had spent their remaining time helping others. Dr. Seo collapsed just as he handed the Nexari scientist to Federation rescue personnel. The alien he had saved would live. Dr. Seo would not. Captain Park made it to the docking bay with his group of refugees, then sat down heavily against a wall. His skin was gray and his breathing was labored, but he managed to smile at the aliens he had rescued. "You're safe now," he told them in broken Krathari dialect. Then he closed his eyes and didn't open them again. The evacuation continued for 6 more hours. Pilot O, Dr. No, and Engineer Bayek all died at their posts, but the systems they had repaired kept working. Emergency transporters moved group after group of survivors to safety. In the end, 847 researchers were evacuated from Prometheus 7 scientists from 23 different species owed their lives to the human rescue team. Not one human survived the mission. Velthar watched the aftermath from the Federation ship. Rescue teams in full protective gear recovered the bodies of the human volunteers. Each one was found at their workstation, having literally worked themselves to death to save others. "I don't understand," Commander Velkara said as she studied the mission reports. "Why did they do this?" They knew they would die. They knew the mission was impossible. Velthar had been asking himself the same question. Every logical analysis said the humans should have stayed away from the contaminated station. At best, they could have evacuated a few dozen people before dying themselves. The rational choice was to let the Federation handle the situation with proper equipment and trained personnel. But the humans had seen 847 people who needed help, and they had acted immediately. The memorial service was held on the Federation flagship. Representatives from all 23 rescued species attended. Velthar listened as they spoke about the humans who had saved them. Dr. Keltari, a Nexari physicist, spoke about Dr. Seo. He spent his final hours treating patients instead of seeking treatment for himself. When I asked why he didn't evacuate with the first group, he said someone needed to stay and help the injured. Captain Mordek, a Krathari warrior, described Captain Park. He guided us through the contaminated sections when we couldn't see. He knew the station better than we did, and he used that knowledge to save us instead of himself. Engineer Prime Zexhai talked about Engineer Bayek. She restored power to systems that saved hundreds of lives. When her equipment failed and she was dying, she kept working with her bare hands. I have never seen such dedication to duty. As Velthar listened to these testimonials, he began to understand something profound about human nature. They didn't sacrifice themselves because they were careless with their lives. They did it because they valued other lives more than their own safety. Most species fought to survive. Humans sometimes chose not to survive if their deaths could save others. This wasn't weakness or irrationality. It was a kind of strength that Velthar. The final test came 1 year after Velthar first arrived at Earth. The hegemony, frustrated by their failures against human forces, decided to end the problem permanently. They gathered their largest fleet, 400 warships including 20 massive dreadnoughts, and set course for Earth itself. Belthar was aboard the Federation observation vessel when the news arrived. The intelligence reports were clear. This was not a raid or a limited attack. The hegemony intended to destroy human civilization completely. The human homeworld will fall within days, predicted Admiral Thexcon, the Federation fleet commander. No species has ever survived an assault of this magnitude. We should prepare to receive human refugees. But Admiral Thexcon didn't understand humans the way Velthar now did. The human defense fleet consisted of only 20 ships. Even with their orbital defense platforms and planetary shields, they were outnumbered 20-1. Every military computer model showed the same result: complete human defeat within 6 hours of first contact. Velthar requested permission to observe the battle from the human flagship. After everything he had witnessed, he needed to see how this final chapter would unfold. Admiral Tae-Young Park welcomed him aboard her command ship with the same careful politeness humans always showed. She was an older woman with gray hair and gentle hands that looked like they might break if she gripped something too tightly. "Ambassador," she said, "I'm afraid you've chosen a dangerous place to observe this battle." "Admiral, my ship could escort you to safety," Belthar offered. "The Federation would be honored to provide sanctuary for human leadership during this crisis." Admiral Park smiled sadly. "That's very kind, Ambassador. But our place is here." President Ji-Won Kwon was also aboard the flagship. The human leader was even smaller than Admiral Park, with soft features that made her look fragile even by human standards. But when she addressed the human fleet, her voice carried across all communication channels with surprising strength. "People of Earth," President Kwon said, "today the hegemony comes to destroy our world. They bring 400 ships against our 20. They have more powerful weapons, stronger shields, and greater numbers. By every logical measure, we cannot win this battle." Velthar expected her to announce surrender terms or evacuation plans. Instead, she continued, "But we are human. We break easily, we die young, and we're fragile in ways that most species can't understand. But we're also the species that looks at impossible odds and asks not can we win, but how many of them can we take with us?" The human fleet began moving into battle formation. Velthar watched their preparations with fascination. They weren't deploying defensively around Earth as military doctrine suggested. Instead, they were spreading out and approaching the hegemony fleet directly. "Admiral," Velthar asked, "why are you not using Earth's defensive positions?" "Because we're not fighting a defensive battle," Admiral Park replied. "We're fighting to make them pay the highest possible price for attacking our world." Commander Dong-hyun Seo, the strategic operations officer, explained their battle plan. It was unlike anything Velthar had seen before. "The hegemony expects us to defend Earth directly," Commander Seo said. "They'll concentrate their fleet and try to overwhelm our defenses through superior firepower. But we're going to attack their supply ships, command vessels, and support craft first. That leaves Earth undefended," Velthar pointed out. "No," Admiral Park said quietly. "Earth is defended by every human willing to die for it. That includes all of us." The battle began when the human fleet struck the hegemony formation's flanks. Captain Hyejin Lim led a group of destroyers against the enemy supply convoy. Her ships were smaller and faster than the hegemony vessels, but they carried experimental weapons that the humans had been saving for exactly this moment. Velthar watched in amazement as Captain Lim's destroyer, critically damaged and losing atmosphere, rammed itself into a hegemony fuel ship. The explosion destroyed both vessels and damaged 3 more enemy ships, but this was just the beginning. As the main hegemony fleet approached Earth, they found themselves under attack from unexpected directions. Human civilian ships, cargo vessels, passenger liners, even private shuttles, had been armed with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. Velthar saw something that would stay with him forever. A human teenager named Kyungmin Lee flying a mining ship directly into a hegemony battlecruiser. The girl couldn't have been more than 17 years old, but her final transmission was calm and determined. "This is for my little brother." The hegemony fleet was taking casualties faster than their commanders had expected, but they still vastly outnumbered the humans, and their main force pressed toward Earth. That's when Velthar witnessed the most incredible sight of his long life: the surface of Earth itself joining the battle. Every human city fired missiles into space. Civilian facilities that had been secretly converted to weapons platforms launched everything they had at the approaching fleet. Even the humans' orbital Farms and research stations had been equipped with improvised weapons, but most shocking of all were the individual humans. Belthar watched through. Orbital sensors as humans everywhere stopped their normal activities and did whatever they could to help the defense. Children gathered metal scraps that could be fired from mass drivers. Elderly humans who could barely walk operated communication relays to coordinate the battle. Families worked together to build more weapons even as enemy ships flew overhead. The hegemony had expected to fight the human military. Instead, they found themselves fighting an entire civilization. Ground-based weapons that should have been useless against spaceships somehow kept scoring hits. Human engineers had found ways to modify industrial equipment into anti-ship weapons. Mining lasers became particle cannons. Cargo launchers became missile systems. When hegemony troops landed in major cities, they found that every building was a fortress and every human was a soldier. Office workers fought with tools from their jobs. Teachers protected their students with improvised weapons. Parents defended their children with anything they could find. In Seoul, a group of teenagers held off hegemony assault troops for 6 hours, using nothing but construction equipment and explosive chemicals from a school laboratory. In New York, an elderly man named Jong-Soo Kim used his personal aircraft to ram a hegemony dropship, saving a hospital full of patients. The pattern repeated everywhere the hegemony landed. They had the superior weapons and training, but the humans fought with a desperation that their computer models hadn't predicted. Belthar realized that the hegemony wasn't just fighting the human military. They were fighting every human who had ever lived on Earth, and those humans would rather die than surrender their world. The turning point came when Admiral Park made her final decision. The human fleet was almost destroyed. Earth's defenses were failing and hegemony forces were landing in major cities. Any reasonable commander would have surrendered at that point. The humans had fought bravely, but the battle was lost. Instead, Admiral Park ordered something that no military strategist would have imagined. She turned every remaining human ship into a guided missile. "All ships," she announced. "This is Admiral Park. We cannot win this battle through conventional means. Therefore, we will not fight conventionally." One by one, human ships flew directly into the largest hegemony vessels. Captain Young Sik Choi's cruiser destroyed a hegemony dreadnought by ramming its reactor core. Lieutenant Su Jin, Ryu's fighter squadron, eliminated an entire enemy squadron by flying into their formation and detonating their own fuel supplies. Admiral Park's own flagship was the last to make its final attack. As the ship approached the hegemony command vessel, she spoke to the enemy commander directly. "General Morketh," she said, "you came here to destroy humanity. But you've learned something today. We don't destroy easily. Every ship you've lost, every soldier you've sacrificed, that's the price of attacking humans. You cannot win." General Morketh replied. "We still outnumber you." "Winning was never the point," Admiral Park said. "The point was making you pay. And you've paid more than you expected, haven't you?" Admiral Park's ship struck the hegemony flagship just as she finished speaking. Both vessels were destroyed in the explosion, but something unexpected happened next. The hegemony fleet, which still had enough ships to complete their mission, began to retreat. Belthar watched in disbelief as the enemy forces pulled back from Earth. They could have pressed their attack and probably succeeded, but they chose to leave instead. Later, intercepted hegemony communications revealed why. General Morketh's final report to his superiors was brief. "Mission objective achievable, but at unacceptable cost. Humans are willing to sacrifice their entire civilization to inflict maximum casualties on attackers. Recommend avoiding future engagements with this species." The humans had lost 18 of their 20 ships and taken massive casualties on the ground. By every military measure, they had been defeated. But they had also inflicted such heavy losses on the hegemony that the enemy chose retreat over victory. In the aftermath, Belthar helped coordinate Federation aid to Earth. He worked alongside surviving humans to rebuild damaged cities and care for the wounded. What he saw during this time changed his understanding of strength forever. The humans mourned their dead, but they didn't despair. Children who